Welcome everybody to this session on corporate climate action. A particularly warm welcome to everybody at COP and a particularly warm welcome to those at COP who are making a big difference. So my name is Sam Baker. I am a part-time consultant with Deloitte, but I'm a full-time advocate of corporate climate action. I think we've got a rich hour for you to discuss and debate climate action together with some tremendous speakers and panelists, and I'll explain that agenda in a moment. But before we get into that, we'd like to hear from Lord Karen Billamoria, the President of the Confederation of British Industry. So Lord Karen, over to you, and then we'll get into the session.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson said recently that when he went to visit President Xi in Beijing when he was Mayor of London, soon after being elected in 2008, at that time, 40% of energy in the UK was produced using coal. Today, less than 15 years later, it is 1% of our energy in the UK using coal. Today, over 3/4 of global emissions are now covered by countries with a net zero target. Thank you very much to the EU climate team and hosts for putting on this event and giving us the chance to showcase our report. Our international partners, Confindustria, especially Mr. Aurelio Regina, and of course to Deloitte. I'm so proud to be president of the CBI, the largest and most influential business organization in the United Kingdom, speaking for 190,000 businesses, employing 1/3 of the private sector workforce, and also CBI includes 200 of the most important trade associations in the United Kingdom, from the National Farmers Union to the Law Society. And I'm so proud that in the UK now, 1/3 of our largest companies with a market capitalization totaling £650 billion have already committed to net zero by 2050. This is a momentous occasion. COP26, Glasgow, United Kingdom, United Nations, world leaders are here. One objective, saving our planet. And to achieve this, we need a global commitment to decarbonize every area of our economy, every area of our lives, and set the world on a course to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. This is the private sector and government and society all working together. And it's about global recovery, and it's about global prosperity. And with the G13, the Goal 13 Impact Platform, it's about partnership. We need to accelerate what we're doing. As Sir David Attenborough said, every day we do not act now is a day wasted. And look at the UK. I can give you an example. Look at the challenge. We set ourselves a target of 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, but in the past decade, we built 10 gigawatts. So we have 9 years in which to build 30. It's doable. We can do it with partnership, with passion. And with the Goal 13, it's about the initiatives to tackle climate change and crucially learning from each other. And the key findings from the Goal 13 Impact Platform report are fantastic. Thereby, climate change must be designed into business models as a driver of long-term value to attract the attention and resources required to succeed. And there are 6 key areas for businesses to explore as part of their climate journey. 1, drivers of change. 78% view climate as a megatrend. 2, setting targets. 89% of respondents shared at least one climate-related target. 3, organizing for change. 64% of respondents called out for the vital role of company executives in driving climate action. 4, key climate initiatives. 56% of the initiatives described as most important by businesses are aimed at directly reducing the emissions of the business. 4, barriers. Company prioritization and investment, employee buy-in, and company capabilities were the most common internal barriers raised by respondents. And so the lessons, there are key lessons learned. 1, building momentum, setting ambitious goals, developing associated plans, embedding these into the heart of the organization. 2, collaboration, and 3, communication. So to summarize, to achieve meaningful change, climate needs to be embedded as part of the broader purpose agenda and integrated into the business model design and strategy. Climate is also an opportunity for business as long-term drivers of value creation. Business has to lead the way. Business has to walk the talk. And what measures gets done.
Tremendous. So thank you very much to Lord Karen for that. So if we could just go to the agenda slide. Have you got the one before that? Thank you. Yeah, so Lord Karen, thank you so much for that. So strong words, and I think I'll pick up on a couple. You talked about partnership, you talked about passion. I think those are both absolutely critical. You ended up with the point that business has to lead, and I fully believe that, and I think everybody certainly on the panel does as well. So in terms of the agenda for the next 50 minutes, so I will talk a little bit about the initiative. And the initiative is the thing that gave rise to the report that Lord Karen referenced. And so we're then going to use that report then to frame the conversation that we then have together with 3 tremendous panelists. So we've got Yasmin from ISG, we've got Paolo from Italgas, and we've got Karen from Storebrand. So tremendous speakers in their own right, but of course representing very different types of business, different business models, different sectors, but all focusing on the same challenge. So I hope you find that interesting, the sort of the compare and contrast of what people have to say. We found it fascinating as we've gone through this process to think about the commonality between sectors and between businesses, but all obviously the contextual differences as well. So yes, it's not going to be all me. You're going to be hearing from each of these panelists, and then we're going to have a wrap up from Aurelio at Confindustria. They're very much looking forward to that. And then we'll close and you'll go about changing the world thereafter. So thank you for that. So if we can go to the next slide, it is my job just to talk a little bit about the initiative and the report before we dive into the conversation with the panelists. And the first bit is just a backdrop to this initiative. So the initiative was set up 15, 16 months ago, and it was set up with COP in mind. And the intention was to create a free and open repository of corporate climate action. So what we wanted to do was to allow people to tell their stories and to then publish those stories and then stimulate the learning and collaboration that those stories could then engender. So that's what we were trying to do. When I've used the word we quite a lot. We was initially 6 founding partners. So the Confederation of British Industry, a critical partner, and we've already heard from Lord Karen. It was Deloitte, but it was also Chapter Zero. So this is the UK chapter of the Climate Governance Initiative run by the World Economic Forum. It was also A4S, which is the full name is the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability Initiative. We had Dell Technologies helping us build the platform. And we had the Met Office in the UK helping us think particularly about resilience. So 6 powerful partners coming together, all contributing value in kind to try and build this free and open repository and contributing in the way that they can. We also had national partners. So a significant proportion, over 50% of the organizations we've reached out to have been UK headquartered. Of course, many have an international footprint, but have been UK headquartered. But we've got a significant number who are headquartered in other countries. And so additional national partners have been very important. So for instance, Confindustria has been a national partner in Italy. We've had Skift in Norway. So there's been a variety of different types of partner, typically either trade associations or trade bodies or climate specific corporate initiatives in other countries to help us do what we want to do. And in terms of what we're doing then is once we've established those networks, it's a relatively simple approach. So we use those networks to go out to companies to explain what we're trying to achieve, to enlist their support. And their support means an interview, a structured interview about what they're doing around climate and why they're doing it, and trying to get as much specificity as we can in a relatively short amount of time to codify that information and then publish it on an attributed basis on our website. So that's what we're seeking to do. And also never forgetting this is about learning and collaboration, and therefore we try and promote that through speaking events, through reports, etc., to make sure that those lessons are heard and accessed. So in terms of the outcome and where we've got to, we've ended up interviewing about 420 companies. On the one hand, that's not many compared to the population if you slice and dice it by sector or by country. On the other hand, there's a huge amount of learning represented in those 420 interviews. Every interview is rich, and when we put those together, obviously there's some really profound and interesting lessons. And we've been highly encouraged by the reception that the initiative has received. There's been lots of interest. Even those who haven't participated have shown interest in what we're doing, and that's kept it all alive and kept it interesting. So thank you very much for all of those who have participated. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please. So the report that's come out just in time for COP is to take those 420 interviews and to try and play that back in a way that represents what we heard. So we have not sought to overlay, sophisticated, framework or unsophisticated frameworks or our own opinion. What we've tried to do is to play back what we have heard. And that's the reason we've called it Voices from the Market. So it's a channel. So the report is a PDF, it's a big fat PDF, but it's also a microsite. So please do have a look at it. If you Google Goal 13 Impact Platform, Voices from the Market, so the initiative name together with Voices from the Market, it will pop up and you'll see it in a variety of different places. But in terms of that report, what we do is we step through the different components of the interviews that we've carried out. And perhaps the first thing to say is the target. The target here are the people within organizations who are tasked with making a difference against climate. And that might be the CEO. And of course, we have CEOs on the panel here. It might be somebody heading up sustainability. It might be somebody much more junior who's been given this. And so any of those people really we are focusing on those people, trying to help and catalyze their efforts. So in terms of the chunks of the different parts of the report, the first is around the drivers of change. And we're going to be, when we open up to the panelists, we are going to be moving through these different sections. So the first section is drivers for change. So what is stimulating corporate change at the moment? What pressure do companies feel that they're under? And this is normally viewed through the eyes of the stakeholders, not exclusively, but that's typically how people have told the story of change. Within that, there's a case study by the CBI specifically talking about government. The second section is around targets and commitments. So what targets and commitments are people calling out? What initiatives are those targets and commitments aligned to? What challenges or processes have people gone through to establish those targets and commitments? So that's the second topic. The third topic is organizing for change. For me, this is particularly interesting because this helps us understand how important the targets and commitments are to the organization. Because as we know, it is important to make it is important to an organization to make a long-term public statement, particularly through the spokesperson of the CEO or the CXO. But it doesn't necessarily drive short-term action. And so when we think about when we ask the question, how are organizations actually changing their structure or organizing? Who do they put against it? How many? Is it up and down the organization? Where's the investment coming from? That organization topic is really important. And we've got 3 case studies within the report on that. So one is on the role of the CFO, one on the role of the CTO, and then we've also got the role of the board. And each of our partners has contributed to creating one of those case studies. The next and the meat of this, and Lord Karen called it out, is around the initiatives. So what initiatives, and we've asked for the highest impact initiatives, and that might be emissions reduction, it might be adaptation, but we've asked people to tell us what the highest impact initiatives are, and then we dive into a bit of detail about them, and then we've ended up, and then after that, we talk about lessons learned, barriers. So why aren't organizations jumping higher, going faster? And then finally, what are the key lessons learned in the process? We've got appendices which touch on the for the 5 different countries other than sort of UK hosted organizations. So Finland, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, and Russia. Each of those have an appendix. So please do look at that report. We're using that report just to frame the conversation today. So next slide, please. So in terms of the executive summary, we've brought together what we've sort of called 6 company commands and 5 system level conditions. Lord Karen touched on a couple of these already. I won't go through every single one, but I'll give you a flavor. And the company commands, remember, this is us, what we're being told, our efforts to distill what we're being told by those 420 interviews. And so on the left-hand side, the company commands, the first 3 deal with the position of climate change within an organization. And the point is really, if we are on a war footing, if we're fighting a war here, if this is, critically important, both to the world and to us and to business, then we need to do those 3 things. And the first is put it at the heart of the organization, so make it part of the formula for success. The second is to make sure then the decisions that are made reflect, incorporate, or consider climate change at every step. The third is to make it part of culture. So it's not just part of sort of decision making, but it's actually part of culture. It's actually part of the individual's way of approaching business, as well as the system itself or the company itself. So those 3 all deal with the same thing. The fourth one, reveal, is around communicating transparently and without hubris. So it's not the time to celebrate success. This is the time to be modest and humble about what you're doing and be transparent. And through that, allow others to learn, but also allow you to learn from their feedback. So the reveal point is important. The next is combine. So Karen talked about this already. This is about combining forces, not doing things alone. We don't want to see, I don't think we want to see short-term competitive, the short-term competitive mode of behavior that we have seen in the past. We don't have time for that. We need to share what we're developing, share what we're doing, and then hopefully get rewarded on the basis of sharing rather than keeping that knowledge to ourselves to get a competitive advantage in the short term, but ultimately slow down the progress of the industries that we work in. And then finally it's really just to say to adapt. We recognize that things are moving rapidly. The ways that people understand and absorb this differ by country, policies changing quickly. And so each organization needs to design their approach in a way that can adapt and develop as we move forward. So just very quickly on the right-hand side, at a system level, I'll just pick out 2. One is really around standardization. We've had the IFRS Foundation announcement 2 days ago, so very exciting. Standardization does talk about definition, taxonomy, language, reporting, but it also talks about approach. So with approach, and by that we might mean, for instance, the strategy process for incorporating climate into the heart of an organization. We want these things more transparent, more open, easier to access for big organizations and for small. And so the approach piece and the transparency of approaches is really, really important. And the final thing I'll just pick on would be the one right at the bottom, which reflects to extent the combined point on the company commands, is cooperation. So we know that we need to collaborate. We know that some of the challenges we face are system-wide. And that means that at a system level, we need to contribute as companies, but also have the receiving organizations to help host those contributions to make sure that we engage and collaborate effectively on these key system issues. So we need to help build those institutions or at least those mechanisms for making sure that collaboration and cooperation is effective. So that's enough from me on the executive summary. So if we could just move quickly onto the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So what we're now going to do is just open it up to the panelists. And we've grouped together a couple of the different parts of the report. And so the 2 parts we're talking about now are the drivers for change and the targets and commitments. And just to set up this conversation, so in terms of drivers for change, so the positive point was, I think, that every single respondent, feels stakeholder pressure in a way they haven't done before. They all talk about the last 2 years, the stepping up of stakeholder pressure. I guess the sort of less positive aspect is the specificity of that. So is it very clear what the pressure is, how it's manifest, and how to react against it? And the answer is a little bit limited. But what does it require going forward? Really, the systems and the approaches to interrogate that pressure in more detail in order to be able to respond to it. So that's what we'd say on the drivers. In terms of targets and commitments, positive is, everybody's either got a big target and a public target or putting one together, which is fantastic. I guess the negative is that thing about sort of the pathway to that target. So do we have as much clarity as we need and want in the run up to that target? And the answer is rarely. And then secondly, scope 3 continues to be called out as challenging, problematic, complex, and a lack of standardization. So I'd say those two things are less positive. And obviously the need is to continue to push on the standardization, but also to make sure that those targets and commitments translate into the other more standard ways of planning for your business. The budgeting, the strategy, every other process you have in and around planning are those targets and commitments baked into those, because they need to be. So to open up to the panel, if I could ask Yasmin first, and then we'll move on to Paolo and Karen. So Yasmin, sort of some reflections, please, from your organization or more broadly, really around sort of drivers and targets and commitments.
Thank you, Sam, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'll tackle the first bit around the drivers and what the pressure is. And for us, the last couple of years, we genuinely have seen such a significant change in the way that our stakeholders look at this area. If I take our guests, we did a survey earlier on this year of over roughly 10,000 people across the globe in lots of our different markets. And over 80% said they wanted a more sustainable hotel stay. And really crucially, which is something we hadn't seen before, is that over 31% of them said they would be prepared to pay more for a stay like that. And actually, that's a considerable percentage. We also see that our corporate clients, companies like yourselves who stay in our hotels, they are increasingly looking at us for a much more sustainability data to help them with their kind of targets and their kind of supply chain. In the last 3 to 4 years, our shareholder and investor base have asked really critical questions around the ESG agenda, and we are giving separate ESG presentations to our investor base, which I have to say 3 years ago was unheard of. You may have one slide in your investor presentation around it. And then for us, we have 350,000 colleagues across the globe working in our hotels. Our colleagues, and crucially prospective colleagues, want to work for an organization that has a clear purpose and that is trying to do the right thing. And obviously, clearly, COP in last week and next week, governments around the world are also coming together. So you see within that, the pressure on us is there, and we have much more data points now to back that up. In terms of your second point around the targets and initiatives, to respond to that, we've got a long legacy and history of really clear targets and ambitions in this space, in the ESG space. But earlier on this year, we went one step further. We launched our Journey to Tomorrow, which is our 10-year action plan around people, communities, and the planet. And if I take carbon, the hotel sector is round about 2% of global carbon emissions. So we know that we have a contribution to make there. And we'd already signed up to science-based targets at 2%. But in September, we ramped that up. We increased our ambition, and we're now signed up to 1.5% emissions targets. Waste is incredibly important for our organization and our industry. 9% of plastic is currently being recycled, and around 1/3 of food being produced is wasted across the globe. And as a hotel company, you can probably imagine, you've probably all seen the buffets in hotels. We've got a role to play within that, as well as reducing plastics and water. Again, and then equally on communities and people, we've got targets. So just to sum that up, we are applying a rear view mirror test. We want to be able to look back after tomorrow to say, did we have those targets? Did we have clear plans in place? And then we handed over to the next generation of leaders in our company some clear things that we've delivered, and for handing the baton over to them.
Brilliant, Yasmin. Thank you so much. Love the 10,000 study. Really interesting. So, Paolo, over to you, please.
Thank you, Sam. I will try to, on the first question, drivers for change, I will try maybe to give an odd answer at the beginning, but you will understand that the answer is strictly connected to how to tackle and act on climate change. The main driver in our company has been technological innovation and digital transformation, involving asset, processes, and people that will bring us in 2022 to be the first utility in the world to have a fully digitized network. Why I'm saying that is strictly connected to the climate change is because when you have a full digital network able to transmit in real time data and receiving instruction, you have, let me say, you have, first of all, you have the possibility to exactly measure the fugitive emissions, and therefore to be able to tackle the fugitive emission that in our industry are by far the largest source of CO2 emission. The second one is for a medium long term, one that you have a fully digitized network. We will be able in the near future to handle different kinds of gases, low carbon, renewable gases, synthetic gases, green hydrogen. So that is thinking about the future. And finally, you have also a second, let me say, last but not least, advantage that we provide much better services to our end customer. We have more than 8 million end customer. Starting from that concept of the digital transformation, we will be able to really establish a baseline in 2020 in terms of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And that was extremely important because if you set up the targets, you need to know which are the baseline. So for the first time ever, we were able to exactly detail our baseline in 2020. And in fact, when we presented the strategic plan in June of this year, we were able to identify the targets in terms of reducing the climate changing emission by 30% in 2027 in respect to the 2020 baseline. So that is much more than the 55 targets regarding scope 1 and scope 2. And at the same time, we have set targets about energy consumption, reducing them by 25%. We have done then identifying a long list of action activity to be implemented between now and 2027. And these actions are monitored on a monthly basis. So every month there is an internal report about which is the progress. And the demonstration of our transparent approach is that every quarter, when we publish we are a quoted company quoted at the stock exchange. Every quarter we publish our profit and loss account, but inside the profit and loss account result, we've also put the advance of the action and the activities we perform toward the 2027 targets. To do that, there was only one way: to involve our personnel at the bottom level. So we set the targets based on the identification by our personnel, so moving from bottom up, of all the action that can be implemented in order to reduce CO2 emission and reduce energy consumption.
Excellent, thank you. So Karen, what I'll do is I'll just introduce the next topic, if I may, and then ask you to speak about both, just in the interest of time. So could we have the next slide, please? We'll just introduce the next topic and then we'll ask Karen in on both previous topics. So the next sort of set of topics is organizing for change, which I've sort of touched on and why it's so important. And then the high impact initiatives, which has been the meat of the study. So on the left-hand side, very quickly, the positive is that we are going broad and deep in terms of organizing, but not surprisingly, it's not enough. It's not well resourced enough. There isn't sufficient capability. Typically, it's very much work in progress. On the right-hand side, in terms of high impact initiatives, Lord Karen talked about sort of 56% directly focusing on missions. That's fantastic, but this means that a significant proportion are actually focused on capability building rather than direct impact. So if you like, they're pre-impact. And to me, that's a bit of a disappointment. It's an indication of the stage of maturity that, companies, big and small, wide and far, are in. So yes, it's great that we're building capability. That's very, very important. But yes, it's also disappointing that we haven't built that already, and we're not now seeing high impact initiatives which are delivering change, either against emissions or against adaptation. So with that, Karen, if I could bring you in, and please, address either the first or the second question. So Karen, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. My name is Karen, and I represent Storebrand, which is a Nordic financial institution. And I was just thinking about the drivers for change. I would actually like to say that Storebrand has worked on this topic for 25 years. So we are a bit, it's interesting to see now that everybody else is ramping up the last few years. But we started working on reducing our climate, or I started with ESG broadly, and now focusing on climate, because we are our customers have very long-term pensions, so long-term savings. And so we decided that we needed to look into what could be the stranded assets of the future, and to ensure that our customers' savings were not placed in those companies. So the driver for change was really internal for us at the start, because we needed to look at the long-term return, really long-term return, when you look at over a 20-30 year horizon. And then, of course, all the other stakeholders that have been mentioned by my colleagues are, of course, super important to attract the top talent, to have a good track record with the regulatories, to have actually just a position in society and your brand, all of these, and your customers. We really see a huge interest from our institutional customers, and specific in having a climate, climate adaptive portfolio so they can invest their money in. But what we see, what excites me, if I have to say, I think the world it's sad that we've come so short, and everybody starts, say that they've started doing this in 2019 or 2020. We should have done this a long time ago. But what's the good news from the finance industry, I have to say, is this about initiatives, because the ramp up that we've seen, we were one of the founding members of something called the Net Zero Asset Owner Initiative that was launched, I think it was in 18 or 19. And that initiative has now become, global, and I think it's 60% of the world asset under management, which is now part of these huge financial groups. And I sit in a few of those executive committees, and I can say that when the whole finance industry come together and look at, okay, what should be the targets? So the ambition is obviously net zero 2050. We all know where we need to go, but it's a trajectory to get there, which is complicated. And then you have the high emitting sectors. Which targets do you put on a steel company or a car manufacturer, so to speak? So the nitty gritty of the trajectory and the work, the pressure that we have to set on them high emitting sectors is really where the crux is, I think, going forward, because we know where we need to go, but it's really about getting there in 2025, cutting carbon now. So one of the great initiatives that come out of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance is that, for example, that the CEO of my company, my CEO, needs to meet with our 20 biggest emitters, because for a financial institution, all our emissions basically come from scope 3, the companies that we invest in or that we lend money to. So now we set up all of these meetings with the biggest emitters in our portfolio, and having one-to-one talks with their executive management, saying, we want to continue to be invested in your company. You are a high emitting company in our portfolio. We do want to continue to be invested in your company, but we need you to make significant progress on cutting your ambitions. And I can tell you one thing, we talk about stakeholder management. When you know, a CEO is called up on one of their big owners, one of their big institutional owners, they listen. And those conversations have a lot of teeth to them, I would like to say. So the finance industry is really collaborating on putting the pressure, creating the pathways and setting the specific targets. So I think that's actually very encouraging.
Brilliant. Karen, thank you so much. Yasmin, can we bring you in, please?
Thank you, Sam. Just to build on some of the points already made. So the initiatives in our world, we know that the responsibility for how we're going to deliver this starts right at the top of the organization and genuinely is filtering throughout. I can't sit in the center and ask our operational teams sitting in China or the US or Europe to just deliver this. They have to own it, and they do. And so we're working very closely with them. And I think that is a significant move over the last 5 years. Let me just talk about some of the initiatives, because for those of you who don't know, the majority of our business model is we work with third-party owners, franchisee kind of model, and the majority of those are small to medium-sized enterprises. So we have to work with them in terms of the investments they need to make to upgrade the estate. Another interesting point is 90% of our hotels are existing hotels. They're already built. And so we have partnered, and we were the first company, I think, that did that in our industry. We partnered with Arup and Schneider and Gleed, where we came up with a white paper on what would it take for existing hotels to reduce their carbon emissions, and how we would then work with our third-party owners on the ROI, the time it would then take for them to recoup the investment they need to make. And so that is something quite significant we're doing, just because 90% of our estate is already physically there. And that's looking then at the work we're doing on how do you bring on very low carbon or zero carbon new builds into the estate as well. So there's something there. Secondly, on waste, we've got some quite specific things on waste. We have introduced, I'm sure you all loved the miniature bathroom amenities that you'd all be able to use and maybe take from hotel rooms. Well, over a year and a half ago, we made a commitment to remove them and replace them with bulk. And so by the middle of next year, we will have delivered that across over nearly 1 million rooms across the globe. So it's quite significant. And now we're going further to look at things around food and additional things that you can remove from waste within the hotel. And food, as I mentioned earlier, is quite a significant one. So food is very different. Food waste is different depending on which country you're in, because of the infrastructure of that country. So in the US, we're partnering with Gooder, where our hotels can sign up and divert that food into other areas. In the UK, we've partnered with WRAP as well to do work in that space. So a lot of what we're doing is creating those global partnerships, delivering some things centrally, but having to operationalize them with our third-party owners against the backdrop of coming out of a pandemic that has hit them incredibly hard. So that's the kind of areas that we're focusing on in terms of the initiatives.
Brilliant. Yasmin, thank you so much for that. So Paolo, I'll just introduce the next topic and then hand over to you, really, to cover both this topic and the next one. So next slide, please. So just our final topic is really sort of conflating barriers, but also the lessons learned. So barriers, we'll hear about them. They're multifaceted, they're many. And I guess the one observation from listening to barriers is we just all have to be careful that we don't talk about yes, but, it's somebody else's issue. If only, I'm really keen to change, but I can't because, it's somebody else's fault. So that would be the one thing I'd pick out around barriers. And then on lessons learned on the right-hand side, this has been such an interesting part of the interviews we've carried out. And just to list those very, very briefly. So the first is, a really strong recognition in terms of lessons that you've got to build those foundational capabilities. And to be honest, Paolo, I would have said the digitization you've talked about is a foundational capability. It is for you, but it is also for many other sectors and companies. The second is build momentum. So get started, don't wait until everything's perfect. We've got to get moving, get going, and then learn as we develop and evolve. And there's many different sort of lessons around that. The third is collaborating. We've already heard about that partnership. We've just heard Yasmin talking about it. So the collaboration piece is critical. And it's becoming not just a sort of a nice to have and an important thing, but actually a mandated action. You know, you have to collaborate. You must collaborate because we want to work together to address this urgent, collective challenge. We don't want people sitting in a cupboard doing their own thing. So it's a must. It's not just a sort of nice to have. And then finally, communicating. I've talked about that at the beginning. And ongoing communication is important. It's so important because we want others to learn from what you're doing, the good things and perhaps the things that are challenges too. So with that, Paolo, if I could hand over to you, perhaps to think about the initiatives as well as these ones, then please, your floor.
Thank you, Sam. I think you're right. I mean, before saying it's a somebody else problem, you need to think internally. And in fact, like you mentioned, the digitization program, the digital transformation we put in place is something that may bring to the surface the internal barrier, because you need to change culture, you need to change the way that the people are working. While introducing new technology, digitizing asset is quite easy. It's just a matter of time, money, and requires a good planning. The difference is when you try to change the processes, adapt them to the new technology, and change the people attitude to adapt them to the new technology and to the new process and the new assets. So how we leverage that? I mean, that is a big barrier. How we leverage that? We leverage through their curiosity of the people. After all, being open to change is one of the most requested soft skills in these days, even from a digital point of view, but also from an environmental point of view. And we used, just to make a physical example, we use our digital factory, that is a real engine, the real engine of the company transformation, as a laboratory to implement a new way of working, to develop new digital application, to drive digital transformation, to tackle climate change. But also we work on the soft part, creating greater awareness on the ESG topics. And the key message that we convey to our colleague is that sustainability should not be considered just a greenwashing activity, but it must be truly implemented. The fact that on a monthly basis, we report our results in terms of CO2 emission, energy efficiency, is a clear demonstration that it's a true commitment, it's not a greenwashing, toward the climate change. And regarding the collaboration, you're perfectly right. I mean, if I have to tell you about a lesson learned about climate journey, is that we need to increase the collaboration between industry, in particular between the electricity and the gas. It has been in the past always seen as a dichotomy, gas against electricity. One is better than the other. And that today we cannot afford this competition anymore. And I have talked with European Commissioner, their technician, Association of Energy Operator, and all of them now, they believe that a true collaboration should put in place. In our industry, it's called sector coupling, but that means collaboration. What does it mean? I will bring you very short an example, is regarding the concept of the power to gas. Renewables, they are fine, but they have one big problem, that the production of renewable is rigid because it links to the wind and to the sun. And you need to couple this rigidity with a flexible demand. But the answer is not the batteries, for many reasons, for the material availability, for the size, for the fact that you don't have the possibility to move the batteries in the space. Coupling together electricity and gas, using this renewable surplus to produce green hydrogen through electrolyzer, means that you store the energy in a vector, that is the hydrogen, that can be moved around and used in different time using gas infrastructure. So again, that is the foundation of the collaboration within two industry, gas and electricity, that has to be put in place. In the past days, in the past year, it's always been just what we say, blah, 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 but the reality never happened. Now the collaboration need to be put in place if we want to achieve the climate change goal that the European Commission has set, but also for the benefit of the end customer in terms of security of supply and also cheapness of supply.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And obviously Greta got that blah, blah, blah from you, Paolo, yeah? I understand. So fantastic. So Karen, moving on to you, please.
When it comes to internal barriers, you mean? That's...
Or really, so just reflecting on these different things. So we've got, choose between, the barriers, the lessons learned. Just any reflections from you.
I think lesson learned is always a systematic problem. The more I talk to various people, they identify things they can do within their own responsibility, but we always depend on someone else. Jasmine just mentioned it, how she. So that's a systematic issue that we have. And when we talk again to our biggest top emitters, everybody can have a list of all the great things that they're doing. And so the question that I asked them is exactly based on your report, actually. So thanks for that. Is like, what are the biggest internal barriers? Now you talk about all the great things you're doing, and everybody points to the regulators, and everybody points to everybody else. Now tell me, what are the biggest internal barriers? It is always about financing and about costs, and it comes down to money and talent, I would say, and prioritization. And of course you have the COVID backdrop and all those issues. And then I asked them, so you identify the internal barriers, so you need to work on them now, and then you identify all these systematic issues. What are you doing to influence the system instead of just pointing at these issues that's with the system? So what are you actually doing to if you are with a shipping industry, so what are you doing to lobby for higher carbon tax at the shipping level industry? Do you know? So we need to, we have to do a lot of things internally. We have to identify the internal barriers, and then we actually have to take a broader responsibility to try to influence the regulators, the carbon tax, all of these bigger systematic issues. And that's really what we are trying to do, and that's really what we're trying to pressure our top emitters in our portfolio to do.
Excellent, love it. So really there's not really a clear demarcation between internal and external. They're all our problems. They're all sitting at our doorstep. We've got to do something about it. Love it. Love the message. So Yasmin, perhaps a final sort of reflection from you, please, before we move into our closing piece from Aurelio.
I might look from the lens of the customer and the guest. And I think a really important lesson for me is, customers and our guests are wanting a whole range of things. Their minds have changed. And the beauty is that we can absolutely help them to do something that they want to achieve in their own lives. And so for us, making that this can be a really complex area. And it can also, different governments have different philosophies in this area as well. And as a global company, we have to be able to nuance that. And so we've got a real opportunity, and it's a big lesson for me, which is taking some of that complexity and translating it into some really clear things that we as a company help individuals to do when they stay with us, and maybe take that into other parts of their world as well. So I think that's actually really exciting, and we probably all have a real role to play within that. And we won't be able to do that as an island, as an individual company. Again, everyone else has mentioned about collaboration, but I think the collaboration is not just with other people in our industry or institutions or governments. I think it's collaboration with the wider public as well.
Fantastic. And I guess that communication we've talked about is such a critical component of that. So making sure our message, the corporate message out is clear, but also that we interpret and understand that message from the market. And just back to where you started, the interview of 10,000, I think it was 10,000 people, a really important part to that. Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much, panelists. So I hope that sort of people sense the richness of the stories that lie behind these sort of profound points that the panelists have made. As I said, very different sectors, but sort of an interesting commonality of some of the points being made as well. In our report, we do go into obviously much more depth. We do quote individual companies, so please do have a look at that and pick that apart. But also, go onto the websites and look at Italgas and IHG and Storebrand and see what lies behind the statements being made. So anyway, thank you so much, panelists. So now, Aurelia, welcome, and thank you very much for providing some sort of closing comments in and around this. Aurelia, over to you.
Thank you, Sam. First of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Lord Bill Moria, all the panelists, all the participants for this rich discussion, and also Deloitte for the invitation to take part in today's meeting, a new appointment in which we can discuss and address the urgent issues related to climate action. As emerged from the G20 summit and from the first results of the COP26, fighting climate change requires global governance and coordination between countries based on a real, and I stress again, real cooperation. However, considering that Europe and Western countries have set the timing to reach the net zero goal in 2050 and China, Russia, and India between 2060 and 2070, the approaches to face the climate action are not yet uniform. As Prime Minister and G20 Chairman Mario Draghi said in the final statement of the summit in Rome, G20 governments have increasingly recognized the importance of establishing common policy pathways to coordinate the decarbonization strategy and secure sustainable growth in their economy. But fragmentation of policy frameworks at the national level remains one of the key challenges to face in the coming years. Without a shared commitment at the global level, we will not be able to improve the actual and future condition, and climate objective will remain largely incomplete, directly impacting on the lives of future generations and development of economic systems. We believe that among the many issues under discussion, there are three most urgent to be addressed on energy and climate. First, to strengthen climate commitments in the national NDC plans. Second, strengthen international climate finance to support green investments in the emerging economies. And third, to define the rules that will allow to calculate, certify, and exchange the CO2 reductions of the different countries. In this respect, we consider very positive the commitment made at COP26 in recent days by World Finance to mobilize between public-private funds $100,000 billion to accelerate investments in renewable sources and at other sectors of the green economy. We supported our Minister Cingolani in this respect that did a great work in accelerating this program. Listening to the voice of the business community within the B20 that, as you know, we chaired as Confindustria, and the companies participating to the Goal 13 Impact Platform, climate action is an issue that cannot be postponed. As also Lord Bill Moria said at the beginning, and he stressed this concept, the businesses, companies must be at the forefront of this effort. And many companies have already put in place ambitious actions aiming to decrease carbon emissions, to reach carbon neutrality, and to reduce carbon intensity. Aiming at spreading a radical shift in energy production, in its management and use, the industrial symbiosis at the national and international level will be more than necessary. Larger companies which have better implemented sustainability processes and policies will have the key role to support the small and medium companies in the adoption of decarbonization practices along their supply chains, It is particularly true in Italy, where, as you know, the small and medium-sized companies are the larger part of our industrial system. In this context, it's essential to combine the objective of sustainability within the needs of competitiveness, creating opportunities for industrial development. To achieve this goal, it's necessary to act along different policy lines, from strengthening technological supply chains to bureaucratic acceleration, as particularly true for renewable, up to the promotion of green investments. As Confindustria, we strongly believe that energy, industrial, and climate strategies must be developed in an integrated way through the spread of renewable sources and energy efficiency, by involving all sectors of the economy in innovation and research for new technological solutions, and at the same time by providing for the transition towards a circular approach based on the efficient use of resources and recovery, recycling, and reuse of products. The development of science-based technology for the reduction of greenhouse gases requires governments to quickly find an agreement on policy to ensure a common approach to climate issues. In this context, Confindustria is proud to have taken part in these initiatives, in the Goal 13 Impact Initiative, launched, as you said at the beginning, in the United Kingdom and developed and implemented in Italy by Deloitte, thanks to the partnership with Confindustria, to amplify the progress in the climate field of the national economic fabric in view of COP26. The project opens the light on how the business community is addressing climate action, represent a new resource for companies that intend to follow the experience and action pursued by the others. As Confindustria, we are strongly committed to support the companies like Italgas, for example, and the entrepreneurs and managers like Paolo who want to be part in the change and actively participate in the climate challenge, making green and sustainable the industry in our country and abroad. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much for everybody participating. I mean, we've heard about building capability, digitization, the importance of customer demand, so critical. Lots of talk about collective initiatives and collaboration. The soft and the hard need. So Paolo, you talked about that sort of soft need for sort of the soft skills and the capabilities as well. But I think that to finalize, my favorite point here is the fact that everybody's talking about a combination both of direct action and then influence of any indirect action required. So it's all on the table. It's all our issue. But we've got to choose, what do we address directly and what do we choose to influence, to participate in and influence. But there is nothing off the table. That's the key point. The second thing is the importance of business leading. There's so much dynamism. There's so much, I think, belief now that this is critical. It has to be addressed. We need to put it in the right place in the organization, in the heart of it. And we, as the business community, can make a massive difference. So anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Please do have a look at the report. And once again, if you Google Goal 13 Impact, Voices from the Market, you should see a variety of different ways to access this. Challenge it, come back, comment on it. But once again, thanks to the panelists, thanks to the speakers. Have a fantastic day. And if you're at COP and you're making a difference, please continue to do that. And we are with you and all the very best. Thank you.